If you want to beat 99% of other founders and get your startup funded, especially if you're at pre-seed or seed stage, this is what you need to do. I'm going to explain it to you in this video. Now, let me tell you where these thoughts have come from. I have personally advised almost 600 startups. I have talked to so many startups, and I see over 1,000 startups per year. And I see the data and the facts of which startups are getting pre-seed and seed funding. But I also see the startups that are exiting for really big numbers. I've talked to founders that have 9-figure exits, the type of money that founders have no idea what they're going to do with their lives after the fact. They're completely set up. I've talked to those founders, but I've also talked to founders that have failed. I talk to founders on a regular basis about shutting down their companies even after they've been funded. And then there's me. I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. Many people could say, Ed, you've been successful as a startup founder, and that's a little bit of a debate because I don't have these huge, massive exits where I've got FU levels of money where I can do whatever I want, but startup exits are pretty rare, so it's nice to be able to be a part of that club. But one of the main reasons I want to make this video is because I think there's a lot of bad advice out there that founders get stuck in. A lot of advice, especially on YouTube, is provided by these gurus who don't understand what it means to be a startup founder. Yes, they might have been successful in business, but it's a completely different thing when it comes to startups. And by the end of this video, I'm going to explain exactly what you need to do, what goals you need to set, what actions you need to take to fall into that top 1%. Before we continue, my name is Ed Kang. Like I said, I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. It's just a fancy way of saying I've failed a bunch of times, but that's to your benefit because I like to use this YouTube channel and all my videos to try and help founders, especially early stage ones, raising pre-seed and seed, get that traction, find those investors, and start to achieve the success that you all know that you're capable of. It's not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try and make life a little bit easier for you because doing this whole startup thing is hard enough as it is. And if you like this type of content, I would appreciate a like, comment, subscribe. Channel support is extremely helpful. It encourages me and helps me understand what type of content you all want to see. Let's jump right into this video. First of all, if you want to fall in the top 1% and attract those investors, you need to have a contrarian assumption. The most successful startups, I'm talking about the unicorn founders, are all contrarians. They've all had a thought that has been the opposite of what everybody else has been thinking. They go contrary to traditional wisdom and advice. For example, Airbnb, that's a contrarian thought. Why would anybody want to go rent someone's couch or let a complete stranger sleep on their couch that you met on the internet? Same thing with Uber. Why would you let a stranger in your car, or why would you get into a car driven by a stranger instead of an official commercial taxi? There's so many other examples with contrarian thoughts. Ones that I thought were pretty dumb myself. Disappearing text messages from Snapchat. And boy, did I ever miss the boat on that one. Here's another one for you. Whoever thought you could retail shoes on the internet or eyeglasses on the internet? How do you buy that without going to a store and trying it on? Those are all contrarian opinions. The best founders I know get an idea and they look at how others are solving the problem. And they say, I think everybody else is doing it the wrong way. I'm going to try it this way, and have other people tell them that's a really dumb idea. And the best part is when you have a contrarian idea and everyone thinks you're crazy, nobody else is competing against you. You're probably working in an underserved, underestimated, and underrepresented market, and it's a pain point that everybody else is ignoring, especially the big competitors saying, there's no way I'm going to spend money on that. And you're going in there and you're diving in, you're solving that problem, and you sneak up on all the competition as a contrarian thinker. You know, the funny thing about contrarian thinking is that after it's been proven right, everybody goes, of course, that makes so much sense. Think about LinkedIn. The first time they said, we're going to publish resumes with real names on the internet. Back when everyone else was using pseudonyms and avatars, Reid Hoffman said, we're going to put your real name on the internet. And people thought that was crazy, but it makes so much sense now. I use LinkedIn every day, multiple times a day. I can't imagine life without it. And as I always say, and I ask, what makes your startup different? That's a question you have to ask. And if you are out there and you just have another startup that's just solving a problem that everybody else has been solving and that big competitors are already in the space and you're not saying something different, the chance of you not only raising investment but also being massively successful in the top 1% that go unicorn are pretty low. You're going to be stuck in the middle of that bell curve with every other founder because you're not saying anything different. So when I ask founders, how are you different? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm actually trying to move you along that curve into the top 1%. That is contrarian thinking, and you have to start there. Now, if you already have a startup and you've already gotten going, it doesn't mean you can't slightly adjust, iterate, maybe even pivot into a contrarian mindset. You may be solving a problem that everybody else is solving, but you want to go study your competition and you want to find out what can you do differently. And the more crazier it is, the more other people go, no, that's not going to work. might be signs that you're on the right track, which is a reason startups are incredibly risky. They do not fall into the entrepreneurial mindset that you need just to create a business that grows 10% every year. Year over year, if you're building a business, you grow 10%, you're doing really well as an entrepreneur. But startup founders need to be looking for 10x ideas where other people are not thinking about it, and you go in and you dominate a niche, and suddenly you are a major power player. You created a new category, a new set of behaviors. That's the type of contrarian mindset a startup founder needs. Now, on the other side is where you usually get the same type of advice all over the internet when it comes to being a successful founder. And this is the circle that I call intensity of execution. Startup founders must execute with a level of intensity that rivals anything out there in terms of hustle culture, grinding. I don't care what you call it on the internet, because on the internet, so much advice is all about get to passive income. All that stuff, kick back, go into easy mode, min-max it. I get it. That's really great advice for specific types of entrepreneurial ventures, not for startups. Startups are incredibly hard because you're starting with a contrarian assumption, so you have to work extra hard to try and prove it. And the reason I like the word intensity is because you don't necessarily have to be running it like a marathon. A lot of founders treat this the wrong way. They kind of treat it as a marathon, so they take like 2 years to build their MVP. No. We're talking about HIIT training. High intensity interval training. We're talking about huge bursts of speed. And a lot of times you have to rest between your sets when you're doing this type of workout. And they're thinking, what have we learned and what are we going to test next? But when they go for it, there's a sprint to get to results, to validate or invalidate an assumption as quick as possible. Speed, velocity, that intensity is so important for a founder. And this intensity will often turn other people off around you. They'll say, why do you work so much? And you'll get judged. And I get it. For people who want work-life balance, it is not something that you want to jump into. You don't want to become a founder. But for founders, it is part of the game. And I'm not advocating for it to be like this for the rest of your life. I'm talking about in those beginning stages when you have a contrarian assumption and you need to execute against it to go attract that investor, because it's such an important time right in the early stages of a startup. Now, what happens is you take your contrarian assumption and you take the intensity of execution. And as you do both, then those two circles are going to come together slowly. And as you continue to bring those two together, you're going to face moments where you have to decide, do I persevere or do I pivot? Often in the face of existential pressure, existential threats, you're right on the razor's edge of figuring something out and having a breakthrough or a massive breakdown where your runway is completely out. I heard a long time ago, a lot of people quit right before the miracle. And I get it, because it sucks being in that position right there. But to be in that top 1%, you have to achieve something called product market fit, and then eventually business model fit. And that's where you're starting to reach scale. Everything comes together. Your contrarian assumptions, the intensity of execution start to come together, and those two spheres begin to collide, and that's when you start to experience validation. Validation is when you are proven you are right. You do not get to validation unless you're executing against your contrarian assumptions, and most likely you've gone through a lot of persevering, maybe some iterations, maybe an entire pivot, but eventually you get validated, and that's the almighty traction that we're talking about. This is where you have to focus on two things and two things alone, and that is talking to users to try and get them to buy your product, and then also building and shipping that product. It's a continuous iterative cycle. You talk to the users and you say, will you buy my product? And if they say no, you take that information and you start to change the way your product works, ship new features, figure it out. If they say yes, you say great, fantastic. And then you take that feedback and you try and figure out how do you scale and continue to scale by shipping new features and trying new things with your product. That's what investors need to see. And in the future, when you're in the stock market, the public is going to validate by your share price. But now it's all about culture and getting your culture to execute against all those assumptions. You're persevering, you're pivoting, all that stuff. It never ends. But I promise if you continue to talk to users about trying, using, and buying your product, and you continue to ship new features and work on your product and continue to innovate, you are going to be there. And the longer you stay in the game, the longer you'll be in that top 1% and experience all the spoils that startups have to offer. This is where I have a bit of a warning for you. It's not an easy place to be. If you look at the top 1% of founders, the ones that have achieved that mega amount of success, there are things that come along with the package that aren't so great. Because you're in this upper echelon, this elite class. People see you differently. People treat you differently. You have to go through all the media scrutiny and you have to manage your brand. Just take a look at Elon Musk, arguably one of the most famous founders that we know. Take a look at Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. Look at their lives and ask yourself, do I really want to be there? So maybe you don't want to be in the top 1%, but let me tell you, being in the top 10% is okay as well, but you're still past 90% of all the other founders, and you need to be thinking about these things if you want to get there and achieve that success that you know that you are capable of. I'd like to think of myself as in the top 10%, but I'm definitely not in the top 1%. I guess that's the reason I'm sitting in this chair and you're sitting in your chair right now, and I'm the advisor and you're the founder. But I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to seeing what all of you come up with. Keep on keeping on with your contrarian assumptions and that intensive execution. Go talk to your users and continue to build your product. I'll see you in the next video.